Hello and welcome to another edition of Shed Talk. I've been a bit busy this week with work, so whilst I'm retired, I do help out at the school doing some invigilating work for the exam. So was tied down all week doing that, which means I haven't had a lot of time to produce a Shed Talk this week. So what I thought I would do was just talk a little bit about some of those bits and bobs that we all have in the shed that just help us to lighten the workload, I suppose, a bit. It got me thinking, as I hadn't had a great deal of time to clean the birds out. You saw me there. I've been trying to catch up on that. So those little things that we all have around the shed that help us out, and I just thought I'd talk through some of the ones that I use, those ones that, you know, don't cost a massive amount of money, but help us out in terms of making life slightly easier. As always, if you do enjoy Shed Talk and enjoy these videos, don't forget to hit that like button and do subscribe to the channel. All the subscriptions do help, and of course don't forget, please leave some comments on those things that you have lying around your shed that help you out. We can perhaps share some of those ideas. So let's crack on then and have a look at some of those things that I use. So let's just start by talking about the cleaning stuff, as I was just sweeping up. Hoover, first of all, I've never found a Hoover that picks up all of the seed, but I've got this old one that was a hand-me-down from the wife, I suppose. I tend to use the attachment on the side more than the main sort of sweepy up bit, I suppose you might say. So I tend to use this the wooden attachment on the side. Because I just find it picks it up better in terms of getting into those corners. The bit I can't get to with the main broom, I tend to sweep the majority of the floor just with the broom. One thing I'd say about the Hoover is that I have found that I've got one bird in particular, a cobalt, a nice cobalt that I've got, that really hates the noise from the Hoover, no matter which Hoover it is that I'm using, in fact. And it's not just him flapping around when he's in the breeding cage in particular, and the risk of injuring himself. He doesn't flap around that much. He tends to just almost have a fit, and he sits on the bottom of the cage panting and in all sorts of contorted positions. So when he is in a breeding cage, I tend to try and avoid using the Hoover too much, or particularly don't use it near the breeding cages, just because I'm really worried that at some stage this is just going to go beyond that. And cause him to perhaps have a heart attack or something like that. I don't know. It always seems to recover really quickly after I've switched it off, but like I say, I tend to try and not use him. Obviously, you saw me using the broom. Broom is the main thing I use to sweep up in the shed. I expect we've all got a broom in the shed that we use. And of course, the stand-up or no bending down dustpan and brush, which is really helpful for me. I do hate getting down and having to pick it up using the sort of manual dustpan, I suppose. So this one here, again, nice and cheap one that I've got from one of the bargain shops, I think. So those are the main tools that I use for sweeping up. Some of the other things I use for cleaning we'll take a look at now. So let's just consider some of the other tools that I use for cleaning. Obviously the majority of these are brushes, but you can also see there that I've got an old scraper, I suppose you'd call it. So I use this really handy for scraping the bottom of the stock cage, and also for the floors in the main flights. So certainly good at getting up. What I would say is, if you're using something like this in the main flight, then do try to wear a mask, because of the amount of dust and stuff that comes up when you're doing it. So yeah, so the scraper, ideal for the bottom of the stock cage and the floor of the main flights. I tend to use this about once a week in the main flight, where I get down on my hands and knees and just scrape them out after I've got rid of all of the wood chippings or bedding that goes on the bottom of the cage, so the floor covering, sweep that up, and then I use this to add it in terms of scraping the bottom of the floor. Yeah, really handy. One of those tools I wouldn't do without. Next we've got another brush. This brush here, the main big brush, is just a brush, an old brush from a dustpanning brush type thing. I use that for sweeping into the corners of and some of the areas in the nappy flight in particular, to try and get out most of the mess, but also some of the in-between bits of the next to the breeding cages, so where it's more difficult to reach. And finally, this old paintbrush. So, well, it's not an old paintbrush, not one that I've used for painting with, but it's a fairly cheap paintbrush that I got in a pack from Wix. Absolutely brilliant for getting into the corners of the stock cages and the breeding cages and those sort of areas. So those areas that are difficult to reach with the big brush, great for that. Great for dusting them out. Just flick it round, gets rid of most of the edges, or gets into most of the corners and the edges, and dislodges all of those little bits and pieces. Final one is this final brush isn't really a cleaning brush. It's a brush I use for when I'm dusting the mite dust into the various cages, particularly the wooden nest boxes and the wooden stock cage. So it picks up a lot of the mite dust that I use. I think I showed it in one of the other videos, the Amitrus Earth, I think it's called, that you just dust in, and it's supposed to kill mites. So that's what I use for that. Those are the main brushes that I wouldn't be without, and particularly, I suppose, out of all of these, the little paintbrush is absolutely brilliant. Use it all the time for just getting into those difficult corners, as I say. So those are the main brushes that I will tend to use. Turning my attention to some of the things I use, some of the little bits and pieces that I use to help with feeding and watering. This little watering can that you can see here, absolutely godsend in terms of reducing the amount of time it takes to fill up all of the drinkers. So you'll be aware that I change my water in my drinkers daily, so each drinker gets washed out every day. This here I will mix any additives in the watering can at the same time, and it just makes it so much easier when I'm then going round filling them up. So little spout on the end, tips in, minimum wastage, absolutely ideal for just quickly running around and filling up all of the drinkers. So yeah, something I think I first noticed people using at one of the cage bird societies. Absolutely ideal. Wouldn't be without this particular, wouldn't be without a watering can for filling up the drinkers. It's just one of the ones, I suppose, for indoor plants really, that you get from local garden centres. Really cheap, absolutely brilliant. Pint and half pint glasses, not for beer unfortunately, but I use these for measuring. They're very good for quickly scooping out seed if you're filling up any of the seed containers, but in particular when I'm measuring out my soft food, they're nice and easy in terms of things like the sweet corn and the measuring out the amount of egg food mix I want to put into the soft food mixes. So absolutely ideal. Otherwise these would have just been chucked away. They're not ones that were going to be used anymore. So yeah, obviously it gives me a standard size measurement. Automatic watering system, absolutely brilliant for the main flight. So I use this one, Edstrom I think it is. So the birds very, very quickly learn how to use this particular watering system. The watering system contains a main reservoir, a bucket that holds, I think it's probably about 10 pints or more in terms of the total amount of water that goes in there. And that reservoir then feeds down these small plastic tubes to a nipple type feeder at the end that you can see. So you can see the pipes in this picture, and those are the various small nipple feeders. The birds, as I say, the birds very quickly learn how to use these. They just flick their beak on the small tap type affair in the centre of the feeder, and that releases an amount of water. Never had a problem with even the young birds not understanding how to use these. So yeah, so I use these in the main flights. It means I'm not constantly having to change the water. The water container, so the reservoir, as I say, is sealed, so it keeps the water nice and fresh. And these are relatively easy to clean, so that once a week I just wipe these down, make sure that the water is still flowing from them, and just, as I say, just disinfect the outside a little bit with some animal safe disinfectant, and that's it, all done. It means I'm not constantly having to worry about water in the main flight, and of course absolutely ideal when we're talking about going away on holiday and you're having to get someone in to look after the birds. They're not having to constantly change the water supply in the main feeders, or in the main shed, sorry. So the jam jar seed hopper is next. So basically you buy the bottom bit, the plastic bottom bit, and then any jam jar will fit on top of it. These are, again, ideal. I use them in the nappy flight or the nursery flight for the young birds, and also I will place them on the bottom of the breeding cages when there's a number of the young birds that first come out. So if there's lots of young birds that come out, and I've got, if I'm lucky enough to have bred lots from a single nest box, then I will place one of these in it, and it just gives them an extra amount of seed for them to use. It means I'm not worrying about the smaller seed feeders running out. So I do have big seed feeders in the main flights, but certainly in the nappy flight and in the breeding cages, I will use these jam jar feeders. Say, nice and cheap, didn't cost me a lot of money, and the jam jars are free. So, well, free once you've finished using the jam or the pickled onions or whatever you've got in them. So ideal, I think, these, in terms of cheapness, if you're on a budget like me. Well, turning my attention now then to the show cages, what I thought I'd do is show you a couple of things that I use when I've got the birds in the show cage, that are just things that I had lying around the house that obviously that I use in terms of the show cages. You can buy the specialist versions of these, but if you're like me and you need to do things that, you know, there isn't a massive amount of money to spare, then I find these work reasonably well as an alternative to those professional ones. The first then is the judging stick. So the judging stick that I use is just a piece of dowling that I've got left over from various other bits and pieces. So and that works equally as well as that I use it. So just a normal piece of dowling. So it's not got any of the fancy ends and all the rest of it that you can get. But I use that, and like I say, works reasonably well. The other thing, you'll often see people placing something in the bottom of the show cage to stop the bird from sitting on the floor. My alternative to purchasing one of those is this here, which is, oops, see if I can get it into view, an old wooden spatula, and that does fit inside there and sits down and works reasonably well. Again, you may have seen me using this in a couple of the videos. So like I say, it works reasonably well in terms of stopping the bird from sitting on the bottom of the cage or encouraging it to jump up onto the perch. So an old wooden spatula, obviously make sure it's nice and clean, and do rub it down with some disinfectant, you know, the disinfectant cloth that you can get, and likewise with the stick, do make sure that in between birds you give that a wipe down with some disinfectant cloth. It certainly leads on to this. These are the ones that I use, just some normal hand wipe ones in a I just rub them across the stick after I've used it. So another thing that I wouldn't be without. Really handy to either have these or some normal hand gel. That you can use after you've handled the birds. Particularly in the breeding cages, if you're moving from one breeding cage to another, give your hands a wipe over with either a hand towel or some disinfectant or some hand gel on that. I've not had a problem with the smell of this being on my hands affecting the hen in terms of the young birds. So far I've not had a problem with that. I don't know whether anybody else had any views on that and whether or not it is likely to cause a problem or not, but I certainly haven't had. So these old butter dishes that are really handy for all sorts of things. So you can put a bit of bedding in the bottom of it, and they're handy for holding the young birds, or when you're taking them out of the nest box just to check them, or prior to ringing, that sort of thing, or when you're checking them over. You'll also be aware that I use these dishes for chick hides, and I did a video on cheap chick hides, and I'll put a link across the top of the screen to that, so you can see how I use those. So I use them for those, but they're ideal for all sorts of things, and as I say, otherwise they would just be chucked away. So I do like these old butter dishes, always have loads of them, and then when they become too old or mucky, I can just chuck them away and replace them with new ones. And finally then, and we have the radio. I normally have the radio tuned to classic FM for no other reason other than that gives me the best reception on this old, very cheap tranny, so, or transistor radio. So yeah, it comes on shortly after the lights come on in the morning, and then stays on all day and goes off shortly before the lights go off in the evening. I find the birds quite enjoy having the music, helps them relax, and depending on what's on, depends on how much they chat along to it. And then with it going off shortly before the lights go off, it enables them to know they've got to go to roost. And for if in the breeding cages, the hens know it's time to give the chicks the last feed before the lights go off. So there we are. And talking about lights, here we have the various timers that I've got. The one closest to us is a timer for the, sorry, not a timer, it's actually a electronic thermostat for the heater. So I have the heater normally set in the breeding room, so where the breeding cages are, at around about 18. I sometimes will turn that up if it's a bit chilly for me, but normally it's set at around about 18, and that just automatically flicks the heater on and off. And then the other two are timers for the lights and the radio. So one allows the radio to come on at a set time, and the other one switches the main lights on and off. So there we are. That's all of the various bits and bobs that I want to talk about in this video. So that's all we've got time for in this video. I hope you enjoyed that short run through of some of the bits and pieces that I use in my shed. Please do leave some comments on the type of things that you use. So either leave them here in the comments to the video, or pop over to the Facebook page and leave them on there, to the Shed Talk Facebook page, and leave them on there. I thought I'd finish with just some pictures of the young birds enjoying the nappy flight, as there weren't any birds in the main bulk of the video. So here you go, here's a few of the young birds in the nappy flight. But until the next video, please do stay safe and enjoy your birds.